Hello, friends of the Gathering of the Miami Valley and Champions. Good to be with you on another Wednesday afternoon for what's going to be another fun and exciting podcast. I'll get to my guests in a second. Super excited to have them with us. Next couple podcasts we have coming up, we have on November 18th, 2 weeks from today, Bob Russell. He was the longtime senior pastor at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. He was tied to a couple of events we had here a number of years ago, and wrote a couple books that were really good. One is, if I had to do it all over again, 7 things I'd do differently, 7 things I'd do the same after 50 years in ministry. And the other book he did, which is will have significance to me a little bit later in life, is called Transition Plan. So if you're going through a transition succession plan with work, your church, ministry, nonprofit, whatever, great book to get a hold of. And on December, and I'm hopefully going to have a special guest. They have not replied yet, but I think I'll have a special guest co-hosting with me that day. And then on December 2nd, we will have ESPN's Dave Pasch. Dave Pasch is known to do NBA games with Bill Walton. Have we heard of Bill Walton there, Brent Park? You know that guy? Little bit of a loose cannon. And he does college football, and he does NBA. He just worked with Doris Burke and several of the folks there at ESPN during the NBA playoffs. And he also does local TV and radio for the Arizona Cardinals, which, hey, I'm wearing my Arizona Cardinals hat today since I'm a big Larry Fitzgerald fan. So stay tuned at the end. I'm going to talk about a couple things we have coming up that are pretty important for the Gathering next week. But I'm really excited to introduce a couple friends of mine. It's always interesting thinking about how I meet people, and I usually meet people through somebody else. And Brent, you and I know each other through a mutual friend, Jason Messer. And Bob, did we meet through Dustin Hughes? I keep joking with Dustin, like he's got to get back involved in the Gathering because there's so many guys who have testimonies or ties to him, and he kind of has that, clean-cut boy-next-door face like Dustin does, and says, in time, right place. And I'm like, you're just trying to build your legacy without even being involved. How does that work? So anyway, I'm just excited to talk, share both you guys' stories, which definitely have some ebbs and flows. And Brent, why don't we start with you? For people that don't know you, tell a little bit about yourself, who you are, and then we'll kind of pause before we get to why you're on here for content, and then we'll hear from Bob and then come back and talk about difficult, trying, dark, and yet hopeful times both of you experience.
All right. Brent Park, right now working as a realtor at Real Estate 2 and a property investor. Taught school for 15 years around here, and coached baseball for a lot of years and some other sports. Grew up around here, and went to Wittenberg. Now just kind of stayed around here, and like I said, taught school, and then got into the real estate, and have my wife, my 2 girls at home, and that's pretty much my situation.
What's a quick note? I know I tend to hear from people, the real estate business has been one that's really excelled in light of COVID. What can you say from your perspective about real estate? Obviously, you bought a property recently that you're giving some time in life to down in a great state south of us that I like a lot.
Yeah, I had been kicking around for a number of years of trying to invest outside of Ohio, and I had a lot of properties here. And finally, with my parents living in Tennessee, I bought something down there in Tennessee to kind of go and make a vacation place. But it's a rental down there, and we rent it out quite a bit. And but the market around here right now it's early on when COVID first started, there were no phone calls, there were no show. Like, it kind of got quiet for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, as summer rolled around, it got late spring, it started getting really busy. And then, I think in October I listed 6 houses, and I don't think any of them lasted more than 4 days.
Wow!
All of them sold first day, second day. One of them sold in about 6 hours.
Wow!
I mean,
gotta love a 6-hour turnaround.
Yeah, it's made it hectic for us because it's like, that time, that one for 6 hours, I had helped them buy something the day before, and that was on a Saturday, Sunday, and I pretty much worked most of the weekend between those couple and then another couple and helping them buy. So
sure,
yeah, you got to be kind of ready to go right now because
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
You can't delay or else houses are gone or, yeah.
Wow. That's good to hear it's going well for you. So,
yep.
Bob, give us a little thumb sketch of who you are and what you do and all the typical guy stuff we're supposed to know about each other.
Well, I moved here in 2010 from northern Indiana, and had just lost my job in 2008 with all of the economic downturn. And 2010 job opened up here in town. So I moved with my family. 2 boys were already going to school at Ohio State, so that was kind of nice. Came here in the insurance industry, been through some process and all of the career move situations. My wife was diagnosed with cancer about a year and a half ago. She just passed away February 1st. I had the opportunity, right about the time she was diagnosed, I had the chance to start working with ZCI Residential Construction Company, and we help people repair storm damages, make sure they're getting from the insurance companies what they ought to be paying out and stuff. That was a real godsend for me at that time, and still has been very good thing. I'm transitioning out now, hoping to slow down and retire a little bit. All 3 boys are out of the house now, and so it's a new stage of life.
Yeah. Well, people know I love to make connections. I mean, I think with you guys, there's a lot of conversation you could have beyond here, beyond common experience in life to some degree. But professionally, I would think you guys could have some conversations.
And we do.
So,
Yep.
well, Bob tipped off a little bit, Brent, where we're going. So,
Right.
you know, talk about where you've been the last couple of years health-wise and unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so roughly 2 years ago, about this time, well, maybe 2.5, I started what I thought was gaining weight. I had, quit teaching about 5 years ago, doing the real estate and a lot more lunches out, and thought, I'm hitting my 40s, I'm less active, I'm gaining weight, like I got to be smart. And so I spent the summer of 2018 trying to be smart, trying not to eat ice cream at Fence and Cone Corner as much as I did.
Since you live close to there, yeah.
Yes.
Both places, actually.
And my girls like to go there. And, tried to eat healthy. And as the fall kind of came around, I ended up having 2 hernias and kind of blamed some of the things on the issues I was having on those. And, got those fixed, got into, December, just, wasn't really feeling all that great, but was finally losing some weight. I mean, I had probably lost 20 pounds at that point, but I hadn't lost any size kind of in my stomach, abdomen area, and I had actually kind of gotten bigger and had to get new pants and some of that stuff. And my wife just kept saying, it's not normal, it's not right. And I'm like, yeah. So finally in January, right after New Year's, went in and saw the doctor. Doctor said, yeah, let's have some, let's go get a CAT scan done. And so I had that done, and next morning at 9 o'clock, on the dot, 9 o'clock, got a phone call that said, hey, we need to see you in the office as soon as you get here. And I knew right then, I was like, this ain't good. I don't know what it is, but it ain't good. And I got in there, and they basically, again, they give you the long name of everything and say, hey, you pretty much have cancer, and it's all through your abdomen. So that led to the next day seeing a doctor in Springfield who said, hey, what you have is rare. We don't really deal with it. You're going to be going to Ohio State. And they got me in over there fairly quick and saw a guy. And so basically what happened was for probably they said it probably happened 4 or 5 years ago prior to being diagnosed, where they believe my appendix had a tumor in it that ruptured my appendix. And if your appendix ruptures, you die. Except for if you have cancer, you just think it hurts, and you deal with it.
I don't think I've heard you
bit.
say that. So it was almost like the cancer
Caused
in
my
some
appendix
sense,
to-
but it caused you to live too.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so basically my appendix burst, and then the cancer started just filling up my abdomen and that's what made me kept getting bigger, and I really didn't know it. And so that kind of was January, February of 2019, meeting doctors, looking at scans, figuring out, that 20-some pounds you lost wasn't because you were dieting. It was because cancer was stealing it from you. And that's when you kind of look in the mirror and you look at your arms and legs a little and go, oh, my gosh, I don't look like I used to. and pretty scary time. I mean, you start reading on the internet, which was by far the worst thing I ever did, because you're trying to get all the information you can, but then you read about it, and it's like, this isn't good. And, you're scared to death of what they're going to do, what they're going to say. And so then, March 1st, 2019, it was my first chemo treatment, and, started the process from there. You want me to kind of catch up till today, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
Give us a few minutes of that.
Sure. So March 1st was my first one, and I will say probably the month of February, I was in bad shape. I didn't leave the house very much. I had fevers every night, running, right about 100 every night. Felt awful. Cancer was getting me, and so then started doing the chemo every 2 weeks, and I would say somewhere around early May, I went in for a treatment. I said, I feel a little better, and they said, yeah, okay, So they did one of the blood tests, and they said, man, that thing's like dropped a lot already. And so there's one of the blood tests. It's 0 to 5 is a normal number. So they test you. You're somewhere probably 2 or 3, and anything over 20 is considered pretty severe cancer, pretty active. And mine was 71, so it was a lot of it, and a lot of it was active. And that number started dropping dramatically, and then last fall, one of the drugs, they had to stop one of the drugs last fall because it was causing too many issues with my fingers and toes, and just losing feeling. I was burning myself. I didn't know I was burning myself because you couldn't feel your fingers. And so they stopped that drug, but about this time in 2019, that blood test had gotten back down under 5. I was in the normal range, and I've stayed there since. And
is there a stage of where you are right now?
No, I mean so that's where Bob and I were talking a little bit before we got here. I will never get a cancer-free. Yeah. I will never get a remission.
You're doing your 2-week treatments for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it'll be chemo every 2 weeks, forever until maybe somewhere they come up with something new, or.
But you're not in a non-hopeful way. But you're just looking like that's probably not super realistic, and
Correct,
this is your life.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, every 2 weeks I'm going to go to the James and get pumped full of some poison, and it stinks. It's not fun. I mean, it makes me feel like crap. There's a 24-hour period where I feel just awful. I mean, it's terrible. And then the next 24 hours, you start, okay, I'm starting to get a little better. And then I've learned the pattern. I've learned how it's going to go, and learned what I can do. And
when you say you learned the pattern, is there comfort in that? Like, you know how it's going to be, or is it so monotonous? It's like, give me something that's different on a daily, weekly experience thing.
I think for me, I mean, that's how I'm always a pattern guy. My wife would tell you.
So you embrace it.
I like having things planned out. I like having a schedule. I like knowing what's going on. So for me, yeah,
it works.
I do well with knowing, hey, Thursday is going to be treatment. Friday I'm going to feel really good because of the steroids, but I'm going to have a needle stuck in me and pumping through. And then I know how Saturday, Sunday will play out.
So it can steady you. There's some knowledge versus being up and down.
Yeah, and work-wise and getting things done and family stuff, I can plan because I know how I'm going to feel through that, and I know, when I'm going to be able to work, not work, when I'm going to need to kind of take it easy.
So let's pause on this for a second. So Bob, with you hear all this. Obviously, as we talked on the way over here, it's not exactly the same. Right. There's some similarities. There's some differences. It's not about one-upmanship or anything like that as far as what it is. But when you hear Brent talk about this, knowing what Ellen went through, and you can unpack her experience a bit, how does that feel? Like, do you feel like, I wish that was me instead? Like, especially as you thought about Ellen versus like nobody wants cancer,
right,
on any level.
Right.
Or is there something to like, okay, I can serve her versus how would it be for her having to serve me if it was reversed? What was that experience like for you, witnessing it through the other person in Ellen?
Yeah. So it was hard knowing that I really couldn't change anything.
Like, you can do nothing other than be there.
Right. And serve her, like you said, which she complimented me well on doing that, and so did other people.
It's not typically how things work. Or if you serve your wife, it doesn't typically go. You get great compliments with and for that, right?
Right. I think what's hard is really you're just sitting back doing what you can do, but you're watching and know that you're really helpless in being able to change anything. And so the emotions that you run through are her emotions, and what can you do to really help her?
Well, I'd love to have Lauren here to hear where she echoes what Bob says, but
it's interesting because I guess from my end I kind of feel the same way where I feel helpless as well. Like
Sure.
There's very little I can do other than show up over there on Thursdays, every other Thursday. I mean, I think that's where, and I know we'll get to more, but that's where you really get into the, trusting God and knowing like, hey, I'm not in control of this, and there's very little I can control of how it goes, and that was the hard pill to swallow early on when they said, we're going to give you this stuff, but we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's like there's nothing you can do.
So I like to lean in here. I mean, obviously we want to be hopeful and encouraging. That will always happen at some point, especially, the later we get in a podcast like this. But I definitely want to be real and honest and not be afraid to deal with dark and hard and difficult and challenging, all that. I mentioned to you guys, there's the movie out on Amazon Prime. I think it's still on Amazon Prime, called Gleason. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, know much about it. But Steve Gleason, who is very famous for the block punt right after Katrina for the New Orleans Saints when they beat the Falcons, and he got ALS. He's still alive. I'm a little surprised this far in. And that documentary to me was so gripping at just how brutal this disease is. Like, they held nothing back. I mean, they were very raw and honest and real with him and his wife, and where she really struggled and he felt like she was distant and all that. So, Bob, talk about, and we'll get to you on this, Brent, too. Talk about when it was like really dark. Like, what was a moment, a time, a space where you remember it like it was yesterday? Like, man, this was dark. Whether that's God being absent, whether that's you being totally hopeless, whatever that looked like, and then put some labels on what you were feeling in that. Give me a moment.
So I'm going to have to say that in this whole process, I have never been angry with God. I have not.
Does that feel weird to say?
Yeah, because I have been there in the past.
But not related to cancer with Ellen.
This process. But I think those situations in the past put me in the place I am now.
Amen. That's a good way to phrase that. I like that.
Really is. So I remember it was in June where we first went to the emergency room. She was supposed to have a colonoscopy, and then they did some other tests with it. And when they first came back and told us that her cancer had spread to her liver and it was stage 4, well, that's a pretty bad prognosis. And so,
what were you expecting?
We were expecting
2 or 3.
Well, we weren't expecting it in the liver, for one thing. We thought that it was a bowel issue, and
but stage 4 had to be a big jump.
It was, yeah. I mean, you can't go past that. So, so the doctor, he came in and told us, and then he left. And I think he just wanted to give us a moment, which was good. And the first thing that she said to me was, and this is before any discussion about what it looks like down the road. She said, "We made a good team." And so,
and very much a plural word there.
Right. And that's true because that team has been.
Or I'm sorry, past tense when she said made.
Yeah.
So that was a deliberate word there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, it didn't take long for reality to hit. So that was this is a real moment. And then there's just times through the process you get a little bit of hope, like the numbers you're talking about after some chemo. There was one time specifically where her numbers went down. We thought, well, maybe we're going to get some time here. And then the next time she went and got tested, the numbers were back up, So it is a real roller coaster ride. But
that roller coaster ride has to be one of the hardest things.
I mean, it was for us to get.
Real quick, would you agree with that?
Oh, and it's still, Yeah, I mean, it's not as dramatic as maybe at first, but I mean, it's still there.
Yeah.
I mean, it still hits you here and there. You know, especially, you know, just like talking to Bob the other night. I walked out after talking to Bob, and I go back out in the living room. My wife kind of looks at me. She said, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" I was like, "No, just talk to a guy." And it just
So you probably feel both. I bet both in that moment when you guys talked the other night. You probably felt both emotions. You probably felt really encouraged. And you probably felt like you're living a super difficult thing again.
Yeah.
Now, you're still living. You're still living it, but
Right.
let me ask you this, Bob. So I hadn't thought about that because I know both of you and know both your stories to whatever extent. But and you made that comment to me before about not being angry at God at any point. Was Ellen ever kind of ticked off like you should be mad? No. And I'm not saying it in a way like doubting God or any kind of faith thing, but more just like this is real, this is honest, this is raw. Like, did she ever want you to be mad?
Not that she ever let on to me.
Okay.
I think it was just more of a sadness and a disappointment. You know, we still had dreams of being old, sitting on the porch in our rocking chairs together and finishing up life, you know, with the grandkids.
Well, I know we're having a conversation here. This is not a product to put out, but what people don't know is you guys have together had a very significant ministry to Cedarville University students. And I know
before that.
Well, and that was one of the first things you said to me early on was just how much it was going to be difficult thinking about the ministry you still had left to give and serve together.
Yeah.
Which has always stood out to me about you guys' story.
Yeah. If it wasn't for her, my ministry wouldn't be near what it was. So it was a big loss that way.
So Brent, talk about it, man. You've obviously battled this longer, and praise God, it's still going on. But right. What is like pinpoint the darkest spot where you're just like, man, this is.
I mean, that whole first month when you know what's going on inside you, and that month of February where I knew what was going on, and we're waiting till have more appointments, have more treatments, and start treat. It was hard, when you sit down, and I did agree with Bob. I never really got angry. I never got mad about at God or anything. I think there was definitely that, those questions of, man, why? I things seemed to be going really well. I had that nerve-wracking and quit my job, start something else. Is this going to, and that's going really well. I got 2 young girls at home. It's one of those like, hey, most people look and say, hey, things are going pretty well for him. And then it hits you and you sit around and and you start worrying, like, what's life look like? What if the drugs don't work? What if I'm not here, 6 months from now? That early on time period was hard. I mean, it's hard to come to grips with the reality of what's going on, what could happen, and then, that was the most difficult part. Was probably that first month before I started doing treatment, and even it still was there for a while as treatment started, and you didn't know whether it was going to work, and it's just the initial diagnosis, the initial. Man,
probably a month-long gut punch.
Yeah, how do I process this? And I mean, I didn't do much work. I was getting up. I'd try to do what I could, and spent most, afternoons taking a nap on the couch. Most evenings, I said I had the fevers. I felt terrible. I would sit on the couch all night. Yeah. And then again, mentally, you're just trying to process, like,
sure,
what's this mean for me? What's this mean for my family? What's this?
Lots of questions.
Yeah, and it was hard.
Let me reboot for a minute. Just so we got Brent Park on here, and Bob Hansen. Bob was a board member. We've been friends for a handful of years now. Tied to a locker room in Cedarville. You've been a part of Checked Out Young Guns a number of times. Been some ties to that. Been a part of the gathering on about every level. Brent has been involved in the locker room on Wednesday afternoons for quite a while, based on where he is right now with cancer, having to take a break from some of that stuff. Springfield City Youth Mission, which I was blessed to be a part of starting that years ago. You're on the board there. Real estate, too, doing a number of things in town, whatnot that way. When we think about the times we're living in, so we just had the election yesterday. We've got COVID, and that's, ramping up. It feels like, at least in Clark County and the surrounding area. When you guys hear and think about people, either having to get tested or being quarantined or whatever. If it was me, now maybe you guys are saints way greater than I am, and that would not shock me in the least. But I would think if I'm you guys, I'm like, well, you guys quit whining about whatever. I know it's real. I know it's whatever. But you lost your wife of many years earlier this year. You've been battling this for a couple years now. I would think, like, get over yourselves, people. Like, you ain't going through this. How do you put into context, and not that I want to stay long on here, but like COVID and what people go through or deal with or whatever, because I know you've definitely said this to me, Brent, and I think, Bobby, you would agree with this, and maybe you said it, that you just, when you go through something like this, you just realize what's important, you realize what's not important, what hills and battles are you going to die on and fight for, which ones are you going to give up, and I think almost everybody feels that way when they've gone through something like this. So how do you put COVID in context with this?
I said all through for a long time with the quarantine, I was probably one of the happiest guys around. Like, I was like, hey, this is great. My kids are at home. We did some homeschool stuff, when they canceled school and spring break happened and they never went back. And it was like, hey, most things are closed down. It's like, hey, let's grill out. Let's play outside, and then I'd have my chemo treatment and then we'd go back after a few days, do it. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy not seeing people. That was the hardest part for me. But, I didn't mind it too much. Time was, slowed down. And I know I've told you numerous times. It really, it hits you hard when you go through this. It hits you hard what's important and what's not important. And things I used to think that were a big deal. It's like, it's no big deal. Yeah. And again, I don't take away from other people's situations, and everybody's kind of got their own thing. And there are times where I look at somebody and be like, man, if that's all I had to worry about, but everybody's situation is a little different. But it's definitely one of those things where I've said on numerous occasions to my wife or family people, I'm like, I got tumors all through here. You think I really care about they put tomatoes on my sandwich, and I told them no tomatoes. Like,
well, I'd be mad if you didn't give me tomatoes. I want tomatoes.
Yeah, things like that. I guess, I've kind of mellowed out some, and a lot of those things that used to be a big deal or maybe would stress you. Now it's like,
Bob, how about for you with COVID? How do you? And again, this is not about making light or being disrespectful with where people have dealt with it, but in context, it would seem like, okay, go experience this for a while.
So, Ellen passed away February 1st. Her funeral service was February 8th. And 3 weeks later, we have lockdown, right? And the week after, right after her funeral, I actually went down to Florida, spent some time with my parents. So when I come back up, there's this little bit of time where people are like, should I go reach out to them? Should I just leave them alone? And so everybody's trying to get through that process. Even I was trying to figure out what I was feeling, who I wanted to be involved with. But then lockdown hit, and the biggest thing for me with COVID has been the breaking of relationships. On a close level, like in our ministries, it's affected our ministries because, people have to quarantine or whatever. Go to a grocery store and you want to be nice to somebody, but you can't see what's behind the mask, and it just has really put up barriers for relationships, and that's been the biggest thing for me.
But do you think it's made you more gracious or more frustrated with COVID based on Ellen's passing in February? Or
well, it has, because
which one?
It's been frustrating because people die, and whether it's COVID or cancer or a wreck or whatever, people are going to die. So let's live in the meantime. That's my thing, I want to be where I can spend time with people, to relate to them, to be encouraged, to be encouraging to them if I can. And I think it's really hurting us on a lot of levels, not being able to relate like we used to. On the other hand, I want to be sensitive because, hey, there's no sense in trying to push my agenda or something when the important part actually comes down to what is your relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do anything that's offensive.
Amen.
About
You're
that.
so good at that.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned about people, whether it's at the James, and I went with you the one day, and three of us I think went and hung out and got food afterwards, and I saw where those people. Something I'll never forget about that day with you. I don't know if you even remember this, but we were leaving. I ran into one of my former Skim volunteer leaders as we're leaving. I hadn't seen her in years, but she looks the exact same. Sam Moore was her maiden. I forgot her married name. Sam, if you're watching, we're giving you a shout out. But and it was just like the joy she had on her face about doing what she does, which is serving people who have cancer like yourself. And that just blew me away. Like, that was such a nice little moment for me being with you to see that. And like, this is the kind of care Brent gets. Yeah. So whether it's that, whether it's friends, whether it's church family, whether it's whoever it is, what have you learned about people that you didn't know if you wouldn't have gone through this?
Man, I've learned a lot. Like, I know that we did a study with our small group on caring for people and caring for others. And
Cornerstone Baptist, let's give them a shout out.
There you go.
Go Bryants.
Sam Bryant.
And Megan.
And Megan. But when you go through this, and it's hard for me, 'cause I grew up in a church where there were a lot of older folks, and my parents were doing stuff for them, and I was along, and that's what you did.
Yeah.
And that's, like, there are people, you just help those folks who need it. And so I was kind of always, it was really hard for me to then be on the other side of that. But to see...
Can I just say, we got to quit that as guys.
Yeah.
Every time I think about that kind of statement, I've said it, and I know people will say it, like, we got to receive.
Yeah.
God wants us to receive.
We'll throw out another gathering guy from Cornerstone, Scott Brown, was one of the ones that talked to me early on about that. And he's like, dude,
got to receive
you got to let people help you. You're in a tough spot. And but again, that was early on where I'm trying to process everything. And but man, the number of people who just and again, COVID killed all of it. But I was having people. I mean, I had people calling me left and right to take me over to Columbus.
Well, speak to the story we were going to get to. And while we're here, talk about what Steve Leap did. Good friend, gathering champion, and Young Guns extraordinaire, right-hand guy, Steve Leap.
My friend Steve, I didn't know Steve super well beforehand. I mean, we had been here and there together, had very similar background, baseball, different things, Wittenberg. And, Steve reached out and said, hey, I'd love to take you over there. And I said, sure, different, like I said, I always had a crew of people that were always willing to go, and it's like, hey, I got to leave at 6:15 or 6:30 or 7. It's like, okay, yeah, no problem. I'll be at your house. I'll take you. And it's like, it'll take all day. We'll be back in the middle of the afternoon. That's fine. We're going. So, Steve and I go and we chat, and just, I think one of the things I appreciated most about Steve and Jeff, you were one of the other people I mentioned a lot too. Two probably the people that asked some of the best questions about what I was going through, how it went, just what I was thinking, like how I know you asked me questions like that on the way going over there. And one of the things I told Steve was, I said, really on that Thursday morning, it kind of gets me back into that, competitive mode where it's like, okay, I know what I got to do today. Time to show up. It's not going to be fun. These next few days aren't going to be fun, but let's do it. And I told Steve, I said, really for me, the hardest part is Wednesday and Wednesday evening, because I feel good. I mean, once, after a couple months of treatment, I started getting to the point where I would have a few days of bad after, but then I'd have a week of feeling good. And usually that last day, I feel good. Oh. And I got to the point where this summer I played golf a few times. I kind of do what I do. And
did you get to increase did you get some extra mulligans? Just say, come on,
I did
not.
Cancer.
Throw me in, like every 2 holes I get a mulligan.
I did not. I had to beat my brother-in-law, so fair and square. But anyway, so yeah, I told Steve, I said, man, Wednesdays are hard because you sit around at night feeling good, and you know what the next day is, and it's like you can't get it out of your mind because you start thinking about your next couple of days coming up. So
tell us, tell people what he did. Love this.
So that was conversation. We go, we have our time over there, we eat afterwards, have fun, come back, and a couple of weeks later, Steve, he's texting here and there, just, hey, how you doing, this and that, sports text back and forth, whatnot. And one Wednesday evening, he says, hey, can I send you a couple of videos? Sure, go ahead, man. So I go kind of put my kids to bed and help with that process. Come back out around 10 o'clock on the night before chemo and grab my phone. And I have 17 videos from Steve Leap. Like, what the heck is Steve? He sent me 17 videos. And so I started looking at it, and it'll get me choked up a little bit. There were 17 videos from guys around town that I knew, just with encouraging messages. And a couple guys I didn't know that I've gotten to know since then. But man, that was powerful, when you're like, and that, I guess, what I've learned, yes, what have I learned about people? I've learned that I've got a ton of people that, I got an army of people that are praying for me, that have my back, that are like, these guys are not like, it's not a, hey man, here's a text and I'm, I say this and that's what it is. It's like, these dudes are serious and they're there and they will help me regardless. And, even if it's just, I need to have a phone call and talk, or it's like, what do you need? You need dinner? What do you need? You need a ride? What do you need? We got you.
I know, it's funny. I know we live in it. It was cool. Steve sent me all those videos, and it was so neat because a lot of them I know were young gun guys and whatnot that way. But I know, I think it was sometime after that was when you met up with a friend of all of ours and board member Tim Howeller. And, he'd taken a selfie, and he was, I could just see his enthusiasm in that picture. As a 61-year-old, 62-year-old man, whatever he is. And he was just excited to be with you. And, it was just neat to see that value people placed on you. Bob, what about for you personally, or something Ellen felt? Like, what did people's give it a concrete example of people's love for you guys in that, and what have you learned about people?
So shortly after Ellen was diagnosed, we got online and set up a web page on Caring Bridge. And I don't know if you've done that, Brandon.
Yeah, we did something. So,
okay. Yeah. And the responses from people, some that we hadn't heard from years, reached out to us. But then your pool starts to narrow down, and the ones that you're closest to, family and friends who are as close as family, really step up. A buddy of mine, he's in my inner circle. He would text me every day, just say, I'm praying for you. And he's in Illinois, but I knew it, and there are people that are faithful, and man, they just encourage you by just, they're not preaching, they're not. My buddy Mike, he couldn't bring a meal over, but just reaching out, let me know he had my back, and my brother and Len, they'll probably get a chance to watch this at some point, so I want to make sure I list those guys.
I love about those kind of stories. We talked about that in our locker room that met for lunch today. One of the guys in our locker room runs the YMCA locally, Paul Weber, neat guy. And he was saying, and he wasn't saying this to be braggadocious, he was just saying it, but he's got a good buddy that lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And this guy was encouraging him, inviting him to come he's running a marathon. And Paul just talked about his schedule, and it's busy and it's whatever, but he's like, you know what? For 30 seconds that he'll see me, that'll mean something. So I'm going. It just kind of blew me away. I have a guy who I'm good friends with who went through divorce, and he just recently remarried, and he's got to go, several times a month to go pick up and trade with his ex-wife with kids. And I just said, hey, you know what? I'd love to ride with you sometime when you do it. And I thought, he's going to have at least 2 hours in there where he's by himself either way. And man, it'd be fun to hang out. And I just find when we do little things, I'm amazed. We always think it's the big things. It's so often, and I'm sure you guys both could agree with that, it's the little things that people do. Brady, you got something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing I've learned in the last year, 2 years. Like, just, it's those little things. It's the little, it's made me a better person. It's made me a better friend to other people going through things where it's like, yeah, I see this, and so I'm going to reach out. I'm going to do, it's things that before it's like, oh, I'm too busy, or it doesn't make it to the top of your list. And now it's like, no, that is the top of my list. I'm making sure that tomorrow I'm reaching out. And like you said, I mean, you get those people that, right now I don't have anybody that's an everyday kind of, but you get those people that, maybe once a week or every now and then, they just shoot you a text. Hey man, thinking about you, praying for you. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good day. When's your next treatment? How's it going? What do you need? just, hey, I saw a Bible verse this morning. I thought of you. Send it to me. I got that handful of, 8 to 10 guys that, on a regular basis, something like that are just there.
So tell me this. Hebrews 13, 7 and 8, thereabouts, it says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the Jesus you knew, we met, I think, about 4 years ago. You had gone through some challenges, pace of life going really fast, needing to slow down. Jason introduces us. So go back several years for you as well, Bob. The Jesus Christ you knew then, the Jesus Christ you know now. How do you know him in a greater capacity, love him more based on what you've gone through that's dark, trial, hurting, desperate, but you come out the other side? Tell me about Jesus now versus then. We'll start with Bob.
Well, is it okay if I put Jesus and God together?
They're part of this thing called the Trinity, so I think you could do that.
So, curious thing was, back in 2006 when we lived in Indiana, I was part of a study group going through a book called Trusting God Even When Life Hurts. And I had no idea what was coming in the future, but about a year and a half later, I lose my job. I'm sitting at home for 13 months unemployed. And I thought, okay, now I understand why I read that book. And then moved here to Ohio and went through an issue with career and not going like I wanted it to or planned it to. And so I pulled the book out again and read it again.
Wow.
And that was the point where I was driving in my car, beating on the steering wheel, and kind of, why this isn't fair, and because I've worked harder for you than I deserve this, that sort of thing.
I love that kind of honesty.
Well, that's true. And then, but to bring it now, I didn't read it again until after Ellen passed away, because my theology had already changed. And I'm going to say theology because it went from having some knowledge up here to really being real and acting out, living out what I thought I knew to be true. I wanted to make sure after Ellen passed away that my thoughts were still lined up properly and that I wasn't just out there floundering on my own trying to make sense of things, And there's three things I'll learn. I'll capsulize it this way. Number one, I learned that God is sovereign. And I know there's different perspectives on what that means, but God is sovereign. He's in control ultimately. Nothing happens outside his plan. Number two, God is good. And number three, God loves me. And if all those things are together in a nutshell, whatever I'm going through means that God has got it.
Okay, so if someone wanted to pick that apart with what you just said, those three, they're going to give you the first and the third, but they would say, Bobby, you just went through losing your wife. You still had more ministry to do with. Loved, God used you two together, broadened your ministry through her. How do you say God is good in that?
Well, some practical examples are that I've seen my kids process things, and
they've all grown from this, right? Haven't you said?
Spiritually for it, yeah. And so I can say that on a tangible note. But I would also say this, Jeff, that if I could not point to anything tangible, I still believe it.
You just know.
Amen. And the reason I know is not because it makes sense to me, because it doesn't always. Yeah. But God said it. And if God is sovereign, and if God loves me, and he said it, it has to be true. And I have to, so even when I'm out of joint, and I'm not feeling good, and I don't like what's going on, I can rest in the fact that he's got it, and he wants the best for me. I might not understand it.
As you're saying that, do you relate to Philippians 3 that much more about you press on, you see the prize, you see the finish line, you let it strip all down, you're going for it?
Yeah. Some days, yes. And then the last 2 weeks for me, I've been going through things around the house that I need to sort through. I can't keep on hanging on to them forever, but they're all attached to Ellen, so do I keep them or do I get rid of them knowing they're just going to be in a box for years and years? And so it gets kind of raw, and I have the ability right now to just say, I need to take some time and sit back and not worry about other stuff. Just process this misser, whatever, And I still believe as much that God is in control of that moment than he is when I have to press on and keep going.
Yeah.
And so.
We're heading to a little bit of a finish line. We'll be wrapping up here in just a bit. But let me, Brent, so same question to you. And I know you have, one of the things that anybody who follows you on Facebook knows you have been like big pointing to this song, that song, a song or a phrase or something has really ministered to you in a moment. Speak to Jesus now versus a few years ago, and speak to, briefly, the song maybe or something that over the course of this time has really meant something to you.
Sure. And I love those three things Bob said, and I can't echo those enough. I mean, yeah, it's hard at the very beginning to say God's good when you're sitting there going through that. But then, as time's gone, you're like, yeah, there have been he's done a lot of good things for me here. And also just trusting that he's in control and he's got it. And I think the hardest thing for me on that early on was like, hey, you said you believe this stuff from when you were a young kid. And life's been kind of easy. I mean, but in general, life was pretty easy. There wasn't anything major. And then all of a sudden you get this, and it's like, whoa, you're faced with, life and death. And, is this really what I believe? And I think it's a real, like, wake-up call of, like, man, I've said it, but I've just kind of been hanging out. And, but, man, I'm at a point where it's like, do I really truly believe that God is good? And do I believe that if this cancer takes me and my girls are at home as young girls with my wife, that's what God wants? And, it's one of those where you got to sit back and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to trust that, and I'm going to go. And
what's the song? What's the song that's really meant something to you? I know you got a bunch, but give me one.
I got a lot of them. Man, it really, there's a lot.
Give me one.
I think when I'm having trouble and it's like, man, no one knows how I feel. I really think the Jeremy Camp song, He Knows, that's a good one.
That's a great one. I wouldn't have guessed that one, but that's
really good. A lot of Jeremy Camp stuff. But again, Jeremy Camp's first wife passed away from cancer.
My daughter loves that movie.
I've not been able to bring myself to watch it.
Oh my gosh, my daughter's watched it about 5 times.
But
loves it.
I feel like a lot of his songs speak to things,
especially when you know the story.
Yeah, keep me in the moment. Like, that's a big one for me right now, because I try not to think about what's it going to be 2 months from now.
So as we're heading to a close, we got to stay on this. So this is exactly where we're going. So you got about a minute each, and this is how we're going to wrap. So you both, and we've talked about this numerous times, and when I know people who've gone through what you've gone through the process, and at the end, or when it's finished on the sense of the next chapter comes, I've encouraged you guys with people that have gone through something similar, like other guys whose wives have recently died or whatever. I know you guys have to sense, yes, my voice is louder. My presence, my platform, what I've gone through speaks more powerfully than it did before. How do you feel about that? Like, is that, I mean, you never would have chosen, hey, I want to go through cancer or battle that with Ellen for me to have more of a voice. But now that we're in that moment, how do you receive that? Start with you, Brent, and we'll close up in a minute with Bob.
Right. I mean, I think this was probably right before chemo started for me. I mean, it was like I was a month or two in, and Pastor Sam's series of sermons, I remember the sermon, like it was, what do you do when you get a ministry that you didn't ask for? And that's where I feel like I am. Like, I didn't ask for this. I wouldn't have wanted this. And if you take me back to 2 years ago and say, I'd be like, no, I don't. And my Facebook stuff didn't start out. I didn't start out thinking this is going to be a ministry. I was just a way to.
But it has.
It started out as a way for me to make sure that everybody I know and people I know all around knew the facts of what was going on with me. And I didn't want rumors out there or different stories or I heard this. And I just kind of was sharing real raw, like, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm trusting in. This is, I heard this song this week. This is encouraging me and helping me. And then all of a sudden I start hearing from people I didn't really know.
Somebody's messaged me while we've been here who was, you taught them. Yeah,
people I hadn't talked to in 20 years. Just talking about how I've inspired them or helped them or encouraged them or, and it really, people say, I love your post. I'm glad I
love how honest and real it is right now. You can see it in your face.
Yeah, you heard the story of the guy over there 2 weeks ago. That's not me. I'm not that type of guy.
Just encourage, pray for that
just
guy.
Say, hey, let me go talk to this guy. And lastly, another guy that just going through it, and it's been real humbling, is my man Gary Lookaball. And for Gary to, say that I'm an encouragement to him is
he means a lot to you. I know
Yeah.
that. Bob, how about you? What is it like knowing your voice packs?
Well, the first thing that I would say, and Brent and I had a real quick conversation about this on the phone last night, is that everybody's situation is different. So there are times previously in my life where situations hurt or were as difficult as what they are when I lost Ellen. And so to say like this is the ultimate, the pinnacle of really knowing if you trust God or not, no.
Yeah.
It might be a job loss. It might be losing a child. It can be anything else. Those are real, and we don't want to compare. God has a specific reason why he's using that situation in that person's life right now to make them more of the person he wants them to be. That's one thing. The second thing is, if I have a platform, I don't know it. There might have been a time in my life where I would try to take advantage of something but now it's just, this is part of my life, and whatever experience I'm gaining, I would like to encourage other people with it. So it's a very low key,
And we've talked about this. I love in your case specifically, we've talked about this, and I know he would be okay with me saying this, but one of my closest friends and gathering board member, and you've served with him, Steve Stuckey, I know him and Deb being at Ellen's funeral, his respect for you grew immensely, saying, wow, I know him from the guy I see at the board meeting, he's at this gathering thing, but then seeing him and her, even though, obviously she's passed, but together and what you had built and established as God worked that in and through you guys with Cedarville, that was powerful. And I think that kind of thing where I know he reached out to you soon, not long afterwards, you guys got some time together. And I'm excited because I think for both of you, the great thing in all this is your best days of ministry, your best days of pointing people to Jesus, the opportunities to be at the James and talk and encourage a guy through and pray. I mean, it's significant. And
I'll say on that too, there are a couple different shirts I have that are, have a Bible verse on them or have something. And I wear those all summer, and there's no one allowed in the James with you right now, and where I go. And just the number of staff people there or other patients who'll see me, hey, I like your shirt. Hey, so I love that verse.
So
just little stuff that, even that, like, it just kind of puts a little smile on your face.
That's cool.
You go on about what you're doing there.
Well, let's put a smile on God's face and pray us out. And before I do, we've got 3 things coming up next week that I'm excited about. We partner up with our friends at Rudy's Barbecue, and we do this once a year. We have a bunch of people come out throughout the day, 11 to 7, 11 to 8, and get food for lunch with some clients, some fellow employees, some friends, locker room guys, take it home to their families, whatever, and we get 50% kickback on that. On Wednesday, there's a cool event. We're partnering with our friends at Zoe and Fairhaven and Southbrook at Camp Chautauqua. I can never say it. It's in Miamisburg, Camp with a C in Miamisburg. Look it up. And we'll spend the night hanging out with a bunch of guys from the Dayton area. And then on Friday, we're doing a community blood drive with our friends in Dayton. They've lost 20% of their donor base and setups with businesses and education circles to do that with schools not being able to have them in right now. So if you'd like to donate blood, there's a bunch of freebies from free chips and salsa, free mask, scarf, T-shirt, one day at the Cohatch. Look on our Facebook page for all 3 of those things next week. So I'm going to pray for Brent and Bob. This has been a blast. Seth would not be welcoming me staying another hour and talking to you guys, but I could do that. And let me pray for you guys. God, just thanks for Bob and Brent and their friendship and the men that you are creating them to be, and whatever is there in the invisible with Brent's body. Lord, you are doing a great work, and it may look ugly or nasty to a world where cancer is something we hate and despise, but you're doing a great work in Brent, and none of us are promised anything but this breath right now. And God, I just thank you for the ways I see victory and freedom and life in Bob, and really in a short turnaround. And God, he just is so in step with you, and I'm grateful for that. And just thanks for the family, the friends, the people you have around both these men. Thanks for the ways Brent's business has still hit a stride and done well, and for him and Lauren and the girls, the great time and space they have down in Tennessee as of this year. And just pray that there were words and just even a physical presence of seeing when I've even seen it here in their faces, how you're working that would radiate to people who hear what we're talking about here today, that really speaks life and longevity of your goodness to their lives. Thanks for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. See you in 2 weeks, team of the Gathering of the Miami Valley, Facebook and Spotify.